Reshaping Rochester series, Shaping Our Best City. Tonight's topic is how technology shapes our city. I am Bill Price. I'm the board president of the Community Design Rochester. We started this series back in February with a topic of how media shapes our city. And then last month, we had the topic of how education shapes our city. This being the third in this series about technology. And then in May, we will have a topic discussion of how food shapes our city. And then in June, we're going to have a luncheon here at Cutler Union, and that'll be to try and wrap up all four of these topics together into one. Before we start tonight, I just want to point out that the Community Design Rochester and the Memorial Art Gallery want to acknowledge that we are gathered today on traditional territory of the Onondaga and people of the Great Hill. We just want to acknowledge that there were folks here before us, and we want to thank them for their stewardship of the land prior to us getting here. Want to acknowledge our board of directors. This is our folks here. Miriam is here. There's Stephanie Annunziata, Eugenio Marlin from Ibero-American Development Corporation, Joel Barrett, local real estate developer, Adam Bonoski with SWB Architects, Stacy Waxton from Hunt Engineers and Architects, and Betsy Brugg with Woods Oviatt Gilman. Our staff is Dawn Noto, Sophie Redmond, Ava Samara, and Purva Marashi. I want to acknowledge their contribution to the organization. Tonight's sponsor, our community sponsor, is Capstone Real Estate Development. We want to thank them. Several of them are here with us tonight, and we appreciate their support. Our other community sponsors include Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, LaBella Associates, and the DeMarco Group, all sponsoring one of these four lectures. Our urban sponsors include Passero Associates, Architectura, Stantec, M&M Development, Colliers Engineering and Design, Moxie Lighting, Greentopia, Lisa is here tonight, Marathon Engineering, INX Architecture, Woods Oviatt, SWBR has several representatives here tonight, Knopf Shaw, and Canandaigua National Bank. Our neighborhood sponsors include Kostich Engineering, Steel Landscape Architecture, CNS Companies, and Buckingham Properties. Also want to thank several of our annual donors. Their names are presented here, and we thank them for their longtime support. Many of these folks have been with us since the organization started. And we can't forget the New York State Council of the Arts. They've been a longtime supporter of our organization, and we thank them for their support. Tonight, we want to acknowledge that we've had this series here. Now this is our second year of having it right in this room and in the main gallery outside, or the atrium outside. We are going to raffle off tonight another complimentary family and grandparent membership to the Memorial Art Gallery, and hope you'll stick around for that exciting drawing. So thank you. And we are also going to raffle off one of Peter's books. We also want to acknowledge Peter's efforts in getting here, and really appreciate that. So hopefully you'll have a chance to look into that. Okay, let me introduce tonight's panel. Susan Kavanaugh is right there. Say hello. Susan has 25 years of experience in legal services and technology industry. Susan is a senior director of client experiences at KLD Discovery or KL Discovery? KL Discovery. Her experience extends to all aspects of litigation, providing legal technology services and consulting with a variety of clients on best practices related to e-discovery, data security and management, and an emphasis on information governance. She is also the current president of Tech Rochester. Tech Rochester is a nonprofit organization that focuses on bringing technical professionals and companies together under one ecosystem to advance Rochester as a top 10 technology region and a leader in digital and technology practices. Welcome, Susan. Patrick Gooch is a certified planner. He is a senior planner with Monroe County's Department of Planning and Economic Development. Pat focuses on compliance with state environmental review, municipal referrals, general municipal law, land use decision-making training, land use monitoring, the county's capital improvement program, and the county's first comprehensive plan in 40 years, as well as the active transportation plan. Before working at Monroe County, Pat worked as a development specialist for the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. Pat attended the University at Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning and the Buffalo School of Law, where he earned a master's degree in urban planning and his Juris Doctorate. Pat was admitted to the New York State Bar in 2014. Welcome, Pat. Peter Norton, yes, thank you. Okay. Peter Norton is an associate professor of history in the Department of Engineering and Society at the University of Virginia, where he teaches history of technology, social dimensions of engineering, research, and professional ethics. He has published work in transportation history, policy, traffic safety, and autonomous vehicles. He is a member of the University of Virginia's Center of Transportation Studies. He is a frequent speaker on the subject of sustainable and equitable urban mobility. He is the author of Fighting Traffic, The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City, and Autorama, The Illusory Promise of High-Tech Driving. That will be the book that we will be raffling off later. Peter is a winner of the Usher Prize of the Society from the History of Technology, for the History of Technology, excuse me. He is a walker, a bike rider, and a frequent speaker on the past and future of urban mobility. So let me kick off, why we're having this particular topic. The ever-increasing influence of technology affects everything from connections, commerce, and work to transportation and social interaction. The infrastructure of these technologies and their impact on public space create both challenges and solutions to modern problems in cities, including Rochester. Limited affordable access to these technological necessities creates a digital divide for underserved communities, exacerbating social and economic inequities. Technology is revolutionizing how we move through our city and has resulting effects on land use. Multimodal transportation alternatives such as electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, e-bikes, and buses offer alternative options for travel, freeing land space for denser mixed-use neighborhoods and districts. Smart city planning is crucial to harnessing technology's potential to establish smart cities and provide key services to communities. Technology shapes our city, impacting our daily lives and communities. Paired with diverse perspectives on creating inclusive, future-ready urban spaces, technology can assist community design and moving forward to a more sustainable and inclusive city. So we're going to kick this one around a little bit, and we'll be welcoming questions from everybody here. See if this is on. I just like to kind of start by asking each of you from your daily work, what do you see as the technologies that are helping us the most, and maybe some of the technologies that we think are helping us, but maybe they're not really helping us? You all get to answer that one, so who wants to go first?
All right, I'll go first, sure. So I'll say this because I actually work remotely for my company. And the ability to be able to work remotely is fostered by all of the great collaboration tools that we have. So I believe firmly that the best tools that we have that make us successful are the virtual tools that we can use to collaborate with our coworkers, our senior leaders across the globe. My company is a global company, so I have the ability to connect with people virtually, online, face-to-face, through Teams or Zoom or whatever the tools are that you use. So I feel like those are the things that make us really successful and are very helpful to our day-to-day functions. Things that are not so successful, and it's not because it's not a great tool or it's not a great technology, it's just not perfected yet, I think. And I'm a fan of it, but not everybody is, and that's AI. I think people are very scared of AI and how it functions, how it generates information, and not everyone is an early adopter of AI. I'm thankful that my company has been, but I struggle with the folks that have not been early adopters of the technology, and so I feel like that's a big hindrance to us being able to move forward. And frankly, everybody's going to have to get on board eventually. Just like we all had to get on board with virtual work, we're going to have to get on board with AI. So those are the two things that I see as, pros and cons with our day-to-day.
Pat, do you have something?
So I will echo some of those sentiments. Working remotely, being able to connect with people, that is something that the pandemic actually helped the county move into. Large institutions, government institutions generally don't want to move with technology at the same pace that the private sector does. So we were able to do that with a forced kick. So that's been very beneficial for the county. But more importantly, it's been beneficial for the planning field and consultants. So we have been able to engage with people on a virtual scale. Public meetings that are no longer held in person but online generally get better attendance nowadays than when we meet. People just find it more convenient. The barriers to entry are much lower. It just makes sense for them. There's a double-edged sword to that because, of course, not everyone has access to that technology, so that is a challenge that we have to try to overcome. And we in the county try to make sure that we have both in-person and virtual meetings for whenever we do anything to make sure that we're trying to reach to everyone we can. So that is a challenge. But, of course, even with remote work, I think that lots of people don't necessarily thrive in that environment for some reasons. So like all technology, it's a tool, and that tool can be used for good and bad, and I think there's a double-edged sword to everything that we may adapt as we move forward. But those are, to echo your sentiments, very similar to what we've got going on in the county.
I'd like to propose a distinction between the technology that's the most impressive and the technology that's the most beneficial. And I think sometimes we lose that distinction. It's very easy to present the most impressive technology as if its impressiveness is what makes it also beneficial. But think about every day, a spoon is a very useful thing that we probably all use today. And that has to do with the fact that it's so simple, so affordable, so elementary. And we could say the same thing about other everyday, ordinary tools that we use. A door that keeps the cold out but lets friends in to your space. That's a useful tool. And when we're talking about our cities, that can mean something as simple as a walkable sidewalk, a child-friendly street, a bus stop that includes a bench and a shelter. These are very simple things, and they're so simple that we can easily be deceived into thinking of them as not very important. But I think we have more to be gained from bus stops with benches and shelters, from sidewalks that are continuous, from streets that are welcoming to people of all ages and abilities, than we can get from some of the most technologically sophisticated and impressive stuff that's commanding all the attention right now.
You guys brought up a couple points. The remote work is one thing, and we could talk about when would it have been better in history to have had a pandemic? And, it's not better to have a pandemic, but, it happened at a time when we had technology that allowed us to keep working. Some industries were kind of shut down, some were allowed to keep working, but I think even after the pandemic now, we see a lot of people working remotely, whether that's full-time remotely or part-time remotely. And it's starting to manifest itself in empty office buildings. And so we do have on one hand the benefit of technology, but if we look at what has it done to our streets and our sidewalks and activation of those, and it almost seems like, okay, there's some good to it, but we're seeing some not so good. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on, are we ever going to be able to kind of balance that by bringing people back into our urban spaces that were there, 8 hours a day, maybe 9 hours a day? Or are we going to have to figure out something entirely different?
So I think that one of the things from that is in many of our upstate cities and across the nation, we have central business districts that were previously dominated by a large section of employees, and that was the main focus of the development down there. There weren't a lot of residences, there weren't a lot of other uses in those areas. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, and then all of their surrounding municipalities need to understand that change isn't going to ever go back fully. And so yes, we may still have larger concentrations of people in urban settings, but we need to make sure that we adapt and we identify ways to bring in other uses, residences, so people can live down there, happening, of course, across upstate. But that also needs to happen in some of our municipalities where people are now able to work from home. They still have the ability to go out and grab coffee at lunch if they can get to someplace easily and quickly. And so I think that land use, zoning, and uses across the county really need to understand that there's ways to make sure that people can have that experience when they're working from home that's a slightly urban setting regardless of where they live. And municipalities need to understand how they can do that and how they should do that to benefit themselves, because they'll attract people who have that opportunity as well. And I think it goes to what Peter was saying as well about sidewalks and walkability. You're much more likely to be able to pop out and do that if you can take a quick walk than if you have to hop in a car to do that.
So I actually have a lot of passion around this particular subject because I have been working remotely for well over 15 years. I was working remotely before working remotely was actually cool. And the pandemic didn't have any effect on me whatsoever. As we are a global company, it did force everyone to go home and stay home and work from home and utilize the technology that we have. But what my company ended up doing was realizing the bottom line would significantly increase if we could shut down our brick and mortar offices. So the only existing operations we really have right now are data centers. Now, in the legal industry, this is a double-edged sword because typically, especially with document review, the anticipation has always been that lawyers are reviewing documents and they are in a secure, locked-down facility. So there was no other way to handle this than to implement security measures across our document review facilities and our document review attorneys working from home. So we figured out very, very quickly how to assimilate and adjust and pivot so that we could have everybody working from home as they needed to be. And I think companies can thrive by utilizing technology in much better ways. What has been disappointing to me are the companies that were once 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, full-time in the office, had no choice but to force their people to work from home, but then forcing their people to come back full-time. And instead of finding a hybrid approach and giving an option to come in a couple days a week and work from home a couple days a week, there are some companies that just said, nope, you gotta come back. To me, it goes deeper than the accessibility of technology and more about the trust that you placed in people. and allowing them to have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more time to work from home and be more productive. I know that I'm far more productive working from home than I would be working in an office. I think if anybody here that works in an office probably likes to spend a lot of time chatting with their coworker or their neighbor, but being at home, yes, there are times and opportunities to be able to go run an errand here or throw a little laundry in or mop the floor or whatever the case or the chore might be for the day. But the productivity, I think, significantly increases because of the ability to be flexible. I know that I can be very productive in the later hours of the evening when my family goes to bed and there's nobody around to bug me. And I can bang out emails and I can send out, communications that are going to reach my Asia Pacific teams, in just a couple of hours. And so I think not embracing the ability to engage more of the employees in remote work is a detriment, because I think it's going in that direction. And the other thing that we're doing is, and this is an academic thing, and maybe you can attest to this, is that we're raising a whole lot of students right now that are going to have an expectation to work remotely. It's just, I think, the nature of where they are going. And there's a lot of people that I talk to in academia right now that are expecting to get a job where they can have some kind of hybrid approach. So I think companies need to be more engaged with the idea of, let's let our people have some kind of hybrid approach to remote work. The other part of the question is, what are we doing with these city buildings that are kind of going empty? And I really love what Rochester is doing right now. If you've been to downtown Rochester and you've seen some of the buildings that have been vacated by businesses, there's so much mixed use. Tech Rochester is housed in the former Sibley building, and there's mixed use there, and I love that space. We've got NextCore. We're a house inside of NextCore, which is the startup incubator in Rochester. We're on the 6th floor, but right on the 2nd floor is the Liberty Lofts, and it's just a great use of that space. So, and then down below you have the commissary, right? So there's a lot of mixed use possibilities that can really revitalize some of these downtown buildings that are going vacant because businesses are fleeing. That was a very long answer.
It was a wonderful answer. So a silver lining on the dark cloud of the pandemic was that a lot of us had, the tech was sort of just getting up to the level where it could really give us that remote work experience that so many of us needed. And yet at the same time, so many of the most important jobs, the caregiving jobs, stocking the shelves, service work, interpersonal work, remote work was not an option for so many people. And now that we don't have so much of a pandemic anymore, the remote work is more often by choice, depending a lot on the employer's policies. But of course, a major factor in that choice about whether I prefer to go to the office or to work from home is that commute. And we live in a country where a lot of people have found their only path to affordable housing is to live 40, 50 miles from work. And so going to work means not only being in the office from, say, 9 to 5, but also traveling maybe an hour in and an hour back on top of that. And that makes remote work very attractive. But what if it were possible for people to have a far more pleasant, also less expensive and less dangerous and more sustainable commute? What if we could have much more affordable housing where we need it? And on this subject, Rochester's setting the example for the whole country, because if I understand it correctly, and I'm from Virginia, so I may have something wrong here, when the inner loop segment was removed, a lot of that infill was rentable apartments at relatively affordable rents. I saw some of those today and yesterday. This is still my first 24 hours in Rochester. I'm loving every minute of it. And if we can have it possible for people's choice about whether to work remotely or not be driven primarily by the brutality and the expense of the commute, that would be a wonderful thing, because we gain so much when we work together. We build communities by working together. We meet people by working together. We often meet a life partner by working together in ways that Zoom may not just quite be sufficient for. A community, of course, and a personal life is more than an income check and more than a job. It's interpersonal connections. And as good as the tech is, I think everyone will agree that the interpersonal connections we have through a screen can't yet compare to the interpersonal connections we have when you have true communities.
Susan, you kind of touched on a little bit about the, students and what Peter experiences with his students. But I think that, as we think about economic development in the community and the industries that we do still see here and still growing or thriving, what are we going to need to do to attract that talent here and or keep the talent here? Maybe they're in our universities and we want to keep them. I think every generation asks this question: is how do we retain or attract the talent to stay here? Is the technology and remote work opportunities, are they going to do it, or are there other things besides technology that's going to help us, stay the course with the jobs we have here?
This is a question that I get quite often, and I get it from both sides. I get it from the corporate side, where I have companies that say to me, we can't find talent, we know the talent's here, but they don't want to stay. They want to come to school and then they want to leave, and they want to go to the West Coast and they want to work in Silicon Valley. I see so much potential in this region. There's a lot of money coming here right now. We have Micron coming in. We have a lot of opportunities to grow and have R&D facilities and training facilities and manufacturing facilities. Keeping the talent here, though, is in fact the biggest challenge. How do we keep the talent here? Well, I haven't found the $65,000 answer to that question, but I do think that companies have to be flexible with what they're offering. As I said earlier, we're gonna have people coming out of school that are gonna wanna be hybrid or flexible, working from home. We have to start accommodating that. That's just where we're going as a community, as an organization, as a country. That's just the way it's going to shift. So if there can be that level of flexibility, now there's always going to have to be folks that have to be in offices, right? And we experience that too. We have people that have to be in offices. But to the extent that companies can be flexible, I think they need to be flexible. We have such tremendous talent coming out of our colleges and universities. RIT, U of R, St. John Fisher, we're both Fisher grads here, so we're kind of, you name it, MCC. We have the MCC Workforce Development Center, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but that's hands-on, on-the-job training that they're offering underserved communities. So we have to find a way as organizations and companies to retain that talent and start accommodating. And I'm not saying that we have to give them everything that they're asking for, because we all know that that's just not how corporate America works. But we have to have a flexibility and understand the mindset of the next generation of workers that are coming out of these schools and assimilate and adjust to meet their demands if we want to keep the talent here, because we need people to stay in Rochester. We need people to stay in this community. We have a lot of businesses, we have a lot of potential, we have a lot coming down the pipeline, and we're going to need to have talent retained here in this community.
I think there's two things there. There's attracting people and retaining people. And Monroe County and some of the entities in the area do have a program to try to retain people. It could be better utilized, and we could do more of it. There is a stipend for people who stay in the county and who come from those local schools and then stick with a local business. They can receive that stipend. But attracting people is both from outside the area or those people who are outside the area and never intended to stay, but finding a way to get them to stay here. And I think one of the things we need to do is better shape our built environment to look a little bit like other places. We have a lot of very traditional looking housing that has been built over the course of the past 50 years. We need to do a better job of looking like places in the South, places in the West, creating those entertainment districts, creating those places where new professionals want to move in, where they want to adapt and live and be able to work from home and then quickly go out to do whatever it is they want to do. So I think that is an element that we are working on and we're doing, but we could do more of as an entire region.
I want to shift a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what Peter's book gets into, because it kind of challenges at least some of my thinking on autonomous vehicles and kind of what we've been promised, I guess. I participated in a 3-day workshop in Buffalo back in 2022, I believe. And it was hosted by Congress for the New Urbanism and the city of Buffalo. And we took several blocks in the city of Buffalo, and we tried to apply autonomous vehicles to these streets. So that meant we redesigned the streets where there was bike lanes, there was transit lanes. We tried to do, curbside management because, in theory, no longer was there going to be, cars parked. They were going to just drop somebody off and then go off and take somebody to another place in the city. There would be these mobility hubs where you would have the e-bikes all lined up and the e-scooters all lined up. And so you would get off the light rail transit, you'd ride an e-scooter, then you would get an autonomous, 15-person bus and come back to this particular street. And, all the while, what we were assuming was that the land that was devoted to surface parking or structured parking would no longer be needed. So we could build more stuff. We could densify the downtowns, add more diversity of land uses. And after reading your book, I don't know that that's going to happen. Could you just briefly talk about just how long we've kind of been promised this? This was kind of shocking to me, since the invention of cars, they've done everything they could to perpetuate the buying or the consuming of automobiles. And let's talk a little bit about where we've come from, and this is not a new thing, basically.
No, it's not a new thing. And in fact, if you want to sell something useful, you can sell some if you call it, say, a useful tool for jobs A, B, and C. But if you want an unlimited market, you're going to have a bigger promise than that. You're going to have to say that you don't just have a tool to sell people for certain jobs. You have an all-purpose solution, a daily necessity that they will need for everything that will solve all of their problems all the time. Now, the ordinary automobile, the non-robotic automobile, began and was first sold as a special purpose tool. So the Model T was designed specifically for farmers. That explains its very tall wheels and its high gear ratio and so on. And there were other tools for other jobs. The well-to-do family had a nice car for Sunday drives, or the doctor had a delivery car, the grocer had a delivery car. And they were all tools. And a tool is something that empowers its user to pursue certain jobs of their choosing. But by the 1920s, the automobile industry in the US, and the US was the leader on this by far, were talking among themselves. And I know because I've read their conversations, they kept good records. And they said, fellas, we're not selling as many cars as we'd like to. How do we sell more? And the agreement was, well, let's stop telling people that they're a useful tool for certain jobs. Let's say that they're an all-purpose necessity for everything, everywhere. They're certainly not. For example, to make a car work as an everyday mobility tool in a large city, you have to erase a large fraction of the urban fabric, replace it with expressways and parking lots. You have to devastate communities to make that happen. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of public money. So it was taxpayer money that made driving work and then made driving almost the only way to get around for many daily needs. And that was all in service of a new version of the automobile, mechanically the same, but now a car that was sold not as a special purpose tool, but as an all-purpose solution. Now, the car never fulfilled that vision well, and yet what kept that vision going was the promise. Every generation has had a version of this promise. The latest tech will finally make this work. So if you go all the way back to the 1930s, they were saying expressways will eliminate congestion and eliminate crashes. They actually sold expressways as, and I quote, foolproof highways. Now, we know that actually it's harder to crash certain ways on a highway, like the intersections are gone because you just fly over the other one. But other crashes are much worse because you're going a lot faster. And we have this same fudging, this same, frankly, deceit going on right now where the autonomous car sellers say, well, this car is safe because it doesn't get sleepy, it doesn't get distracted, it doesn't get angry, it doesn't have road rage, it doesn't look at its phone. All of which is true if you're talking about, let's say, a robo-taxi like a Waymo or a Cruise. But at the same time, it does all kinds of things people don't do, like not understand that this plastic bag is not a child, or understand that that child is not a plastic bag. These are very hard things for the robotics to get. People who are working on this want to convince us that they will get there eventually. But my question is it worth it? They've spent, estimates vary, between $1 and $200 billion delivering robo-taxis that maybe nobody in this room has ever actually ridden in. The only so-called autonomous vehicle I ever was in was a test vehicle which never exceeded 8 miles an hour in an enclosed course. And before I could get in it, I had to sign a waiver that I wouldn't sue in case I was killed. So maybe another $200 or $300 billion will finally make it work, but we don't seem to be on that course. Right now, an illusion of them working is going on because the companies operating robo-taxis today lose a lot of money on every ride. Why do they do that? They're hoping to attract investors for the long haul. But what does that do? It gives you the illusion that a robo-taxi is, pretty good service for the money because you're only paying a very small fraction of what it costs. And a real tip-off to me is none of the companies will tell you how much it really costs. And I think that's because it's kind of embarrassing how much it really costs. So this goes back to my initial point, which is start with the simple. Get the simple things right, like walkability, like biking, like transit, like proximity, like letting people live close to where they work and shop. And when you get those simple things right, then the hard problems either get much easier or in some cases disappear entirely.
Yeah, so I think embedded in that is, something that Patrick was mentioning is, create those environments where people want to live. That's clearly a part of your economic development strategy as well as your community development strategy. Those aren't mutually exclusive and shouldn't be treated as such, but it does sound like, solving some of these problems of congestion and vehicle safety is really just to try and get people on the sidewalks more, get people on bikes, protected bike lanes, get them on buses where, there's greater capacity to, take more people in the same or less square footage than cars, not taking up as much space on parking lots or structures. But when it does come time to think about proximity of land uses, how do we decide where things go and who should do it, I guess? Does the private sector do all of this? Does the public sector, who really should be involved in the planning of what we want to be, and then choosing the technology, like you say, is decide what you want to be and then choose the technology that fits that. So I think that there's a lot that goes on in technology, in academic, that we don't always get to hear. That, things are going on, things are happening, like in, Tech Rochester, you probably see things about technology that we have no idea about. And it's like, how do we make the public aware of those industries that are doing well, they're thriving, they're going to be here, they're going to create jobs for a while, but we don't necessarily see it front and center every day. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's, how do we all work together? We're all from disparate disciplines, but how do we learn from each other what's happening here? What is all the good stuff that's happening that we should really be working together on?
And there's a lot of great stuff happening. And it's all behind the scenes. You don't hear a lot about it. But I will say, techrochester.org, sign up for our mailing list, and you'll get all kinds of information. And the mailing list is free. We don't really spam you. But I say that as just a very cheap advertisement. But I mean it. You know, what Tech Rochester prides itself on is elevating people and companies. We're coming up, well, this is our 25th anniversary of Tech Rochester. We've been around for 25 years, which I think as a not-for-profit association that was a once live event organization, had to pivot to a full virtual organization over the pandemic and come out of that a bigger and better association, I think is pretty tremendous. Thursday morning at 7:30 a.m. at the RITN Conference Center, we are also going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Technology Woman of the Year Awards. And this is an awards event that honors women in technology, the behind-the-scenes people, the pioneers, the trailblazers, the people that are paving the way for other women, and really making a difference in our community. I tell you this because these are things that people don't necessarily know about that are going on in our community if you're not plugged in. So what we try to do as an organization is elevate some of these companies from, you know, whether it's in a live setting and doing an event centered around the latest and greatest technology that a local company may be developing, or highlighting them in our newsletter, or giving them an opportunity to have a voice through a podcast or a virtual session. It's what we try to do as an organization to really elevate these companies, because there are so many great things happening, even with the big companies like Wegmans and Paychex and the technology that they're developing internally, and there are companies that you wouldn't know about because we take it all for granted. We all have the Wegmans app on our phone, right? We can all shop through Instacart. We take some of those things for granted, but the behind the scenes development that goes into those applications is just, it's way above my pay grade. And I'm ready to admit that because it's just not where my brain goes, but I know that it's there because of my connection to the tech community. And so just being aware and being engaged and being plugged in and getting that information through the various associations is tremendously important. We also believe very heavily in collaboration. We try to collaborate with as many other like-minded associations as we possibly can. And that means the SIM Western New York chapter, that means Tech Buffalo, that means the Chamber, that means whoever is out there willing to work with us, we're never gonna say no. We're all about collaboration and making something bigger and better because there's really good news to share. So it's just trying to be plugged in and making that sort of effort to know where to go to get that information, but start with us because we try to do our best, you know, with respect to elevating those companies and making that known. And I know the county is doing a lot of work around that as well. So I think there's a lot out there if you know where to go look for it.
So as a planner, and most planners, you have to be an optimist. You're looking towards the future and ideally planning for a future of wherever you are, for me, Monroe County, that is better than the current version. However, the history of urban planning and really city and urbanity is reactive policies to things that have happened over time. So think about, we had factories, we needed lots of people to work there, so we created density. That density was not supported by a lot of infrastructure utilities. We had some disease, we had noises, we had lots of problems there. We found a way to increase public health issue or improve public health issues, so that way we could live densely but do it in a healthy way. We developed transportation that allowed us to expand our density out further. We were reactive to that because of the car, and so we grew quicker than we knew how to do so. We didn't grow in the same way that we previously did, which was great in the sense that we allowed people to have something that they didn't have before, but we were once again being reactive to policies and technology that was moving us forward quicker than municipalities, cities can actually plan. And so, Bill, your question about how do we work together as a future, the history isn't very positive in that regard, in my opinion, but I think that there are opportunities. We recognize that we need to compete, the competition for the spaces, whether it's land use, whether it's roads, needs to change, so that way more users have access to it and a more diverse user base. So we know that. We just need to find a way and political will to make that happen. Because of course everything costs money, and if you're talking about a municipality that is funded through generally the taxpayer base or grants. And so If we can work together to develop that initiative of how we move forward, whether it's via plans, whether it's via citizens, we can ideally pinpoint those issues that we want to try to address, document them, find the funding for them, and make those changes that ideally we recognize and we see coming.
Did you?
I think that covers it.
So, Patrick, one of the things that you, in the county, you work with towns and villages on environmental assessment and other land use regulations, some comp plans, some climate action plans, and you have, the county comp plan coming up, and you have finished the active transportation plan?
Yep.
So I think one of the things that we hear a lot is about diversity of housing. So housing is really very much a hot topic right now, and I think it's at a point in history where, comp plans talk about, more options in housing, and more options in a variety of places, not just in your, detached, single-family subdivision type location, but having vertical options, rental options, condo options, in places where you want to be and where there are other activities. But what we do hear all the time is that there's NIMBYism, there's a lot of resistance to alternatives to single-family detached housing. And, there's a lot of people right now involved in that and saying that regulations really stifle innovation and that developers really have to go to the lowest risk denominator, I guess, of development, so that they know they can get something done, so that they can finance it, they can get tenants, they can make some money, and then go on to the next project. I guess it's a question of, can we ever get our land use regulations streamlined to the point, and I guess with or without technology, to the point where we could change the amount or the percent of cost associated with development and land use regulation?
So there's a lot there.
Unpack it. You can do it. You can do it.
I'm going to unpack one piece of it, which is the cost aspect. So based on current conversations I'm having with people in Monroe County, it is very hard to build a house in Monroe County for under $400,000. Can't be done. And it can't be done for the proven product that Bill is talking about. And that's not an opulent product. It is a 2,000 approximately square foot house on a traditional lot throughout the county. The way we've been building houses has changed over time, but it has not changed at a rate that other industries have changed. And so we have ways to automate that, modulate that, build off-site and bring to site that potentially could lower the cost. That is not the proven product in most places, so that is not how the industry works. So there are potentially technological savings that could allow us to bring down that product. There are ways that if we build denser, we can then have reduced costs as well. So there are ways to change how we build and the cost of what we build, but there are challenges as well because of a home rule state. Each community in Monroe County gets to decide what they want to build, where they want to build it, and what they will allow. And so that means that there are 30 communities in Monroe County that are making decisions about what's best for them, but then also being told by the developer, this is a proven product that I know I can build, so this is what I will build in your community because I can't do anything else, and I'm not willing to take the risk of doing something that is innovative here because it's not proven yet, and that's a risk that they don't want to take.
And I suppose that's kind of a double-edged sword, that if they knew they could get through the environmental review, they could get through, the subdivision and site plan approvals, that, it's what level of improvement in the regulatory process has to happen before developers feel free to really investigate new ideas on their own? You know, they probably have the ideas, it's just, you know, certain things work. We know what a 1,500 square foot house costs down to the nail.
Yep.
But
I mean, some things, of course, you can try to streamline your local regulations. One thing you can do is put in design guidelines or typical housing types that you want to see in your community. And if you create those in a fashion that changes the price point, changes the size, reduces the lot requirements, you can bring down the cost. In most of our communities, which are suburban, the amount of space that you need to build on and the minimum house, those are all set in stone in your zoning code. And so a creative developer can't do that unless you allow them. So there are ways to do that by changing what you currently have. And then there's also creative ways as well through conservation subdivision, planned urban developments as well, where you give a developer more freedom to design something that they want to design, and then you have to review it as a local municipality and identify what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. So there are ways, but they are not the traditional ways.
Patrick or Susan mentioned talking about the various technologies that are available and how fast some things change in certain realms, say communication, telephones, Apple and Samsung phones. We get a new one of those every year. We get new cars coming out every year. There's just a steady stream of technology that comes out, always improving and improving at speeds that are kind of mind-boggling, actually. Healthcare is something. I have a brother, he had a knee replaced yesterday, and he was in the hospital at 5 in the morning and home by 1 for knee replacement surgery. That would have been, a month in the hospital, 20 years ago. But it does seem like other things take so long to change, and land use is one of those things that just, people are stuck back in 60s and 70s and late 50s type development, thinking that's still the gold standard, and those are prescribed lifestyles in your single family house. Why is society quick to adapt to certain technologies in their daily life, but then there's other things that it just seems like we're stuck in the past? I don't know if there's an answer to that but.
Go ahead, you first.
Well, you have the beauty with some technology that the task is to optimize the flow of electrons, which means you don't have to worry about things like geography, like things about neighbors, like things about masses of, for example, if you look at a jet airliner today, it looks like a jet airliner from 50 years ago, because the difficulty in moving a jet airliner is to move an enormous mass. So you need enormous engines and you need a lot of fuel. Well, when we look at the difference between the digital or electronic tech of 50 years ago and what we have now, it's a completely different matter, as you just indicated, because of the fact that when you're moving electrons, you are not burdened by these fixed factors like the mass of the plane or the amount of energy it takes to lift that mass. And so we can do things with electrons that we can't do with large masses or large lots of land, or also with technologies that involve our neighbors so much. So like we can be private with our phones, but we can't be so private with our mobility modes. And so this is another factor that changes the way technology changes over time.
I just think that some people are not adaptive to change as easily as others. For me, I like anything that's going to make my life a lot easier. What can I do today that's going to make things better than it was yesterday? And so, but then there are some technologies that I won't adopt, like autonomous vehicles. It's just not my thing. I want to have control over where I'm going and what I'm doing and how fast I drive or how slow I drive or stopping. But if there's a better technology for my phone, I'm going to adapt to it right away, right? Because we like instant gratification and we like to get information right away. Now, I'm a Gen Xer, so I come from a time of, where there was no technology really that other than a typewriter. and that was like the latest and greatest then. And the phones were still the dial phones. I think if I put a dial phone in front of somebody today, they may not even know how to call on it, right? But then, technology just got smarter over time. And then all of a sudden I could do my term papers on a word processor versus a typewriter. And then a computer came out and now I could actually store my information and I could go access it anytime I wanted. Then the internet came out and now we had access to information that we could only get at encyclopedias, right? So I think anything that makes your life easier is a lot better to adapt to, but there are going to be generations of people that will always be resistant to change. And I don't think you're ever going to solve that problem. I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to be resistant to change as well. Technology is going to far beyond outlive me, and I'm going to hit a stopping point myself because I'm going to say, okay, I've had enough of this and I want to go back to my old school ways of dialing on my iPhone, right? The old school ways. But I think it's just really an individual preference. There's no real, true, solid answer to that question other than what an individual wants to get out of it and how easy they want their life to be. And I think that there are tools and resources that make our life a lot easier, but there are folks that don't want to adapt to it.
I do want to open this up to everybody in the audience to see if you all have any questions of our panel. Does anybody have either a statement or a question?
Yes, you were talking about the small things, insignificant things working, and see to it that the technology is there to make it work. Because the general public tends to get frustrated when things don't work, and then they don't want to hear any more about something new that's not going to work.
So the question was about the frustration that we have when the ordinary everyday things that we need in our lives, especially the public things I think that we don't have control over, fail us, like when we don't have the maintenance of a sidewalk that we might need to keep it useful, or when a local transit service's reliability falls to the point that we can no longer depend on it to show up on time. And here again, though, there is a nice coincidence between simplicity and reliability, where many of our most reliable systems are reliable because of their simplicity. It's complexity that gives us more opportunities for systems to fail and disappoint us, where the complexity demands, for example, lots of maintenance. An elevated expressway reaches a certain age and the maintenance becomes a nonstop job practically, while at the same time a simple thing like a road or a sidewalk is much simpler to maintain. And this leads me to want to comment briefly on something Susan said, which is, yes, we have some people who are resistant to change as a matter of temperament, but I do think we have to be selective about the change. In other words, we don't welcome innovation because it's new. We welcome innovation much more selectively, or should do so, when it's actually beneficial. And so we have to include in that question, is this innovation not only beneficial now, but is it maintainable, is it sustainable, or is its complexity such that we will end up in a situation where it costs us a lot just to keep it going. We've all had the experience, for example, of an automobile where when it reaches a certain age, we find it costs more to maintain than it's worth. Well, a value of simplicity in technology is that gives us a much longer shelf life for most things.
I had a question about, you were talking about retaining people, and you were talking about new buildings and costs. Well, close to here, there's Park Ave, there's a lot of young people kind of staying there, and they're older homes, and kind of the simple concept of could you do something with technology like solar panels? Is there some way you could, and this is cost, but it is simple, could, bring the solar panels to get to each of these units to try to bring the cost down, electricity and stuff. But, there's an upfront cost. How can you sell that to the people who own the homes? And could they all take advantage of that potential cost savings?
So there are some challenges that I want to point out before I answer the question, and that is that solar is generally a long-term payoff. And if you're looking at rental properties, often people are incentivized to try to maximize their profit as quickly as possible. And so there is a challenge between the desire to do essentially the solar and getting that to work on a house where they're trying to bring out profit as much as possible. So I think what you would need to do to make that viable is find a way to subsidize that or make it something that is attractive enough for that property owner to do. How you would exactly do that, I don't exactly know. I mean, there are solar credits and things you can get for putting on solar, but the payoff is long-term.
Thank you for very interesting conversations that are being had. There was a point where we were talking about not only adaptation to certain technologies, but land use. And Rochester is a city that had specific, not just Rochester, the proper city proper, but the suburban areas around had codes and regulations written into the laws as to who could or could not live in certain areas, who could, and we know that owning property is a form of creating wealth. Who could live in certain areas, who could not live in certain areas, who could have access to property, and who could not. And I think we're still not very far from kind of beginning to shake some of that loose. Part of that was not only legislated, but it was also financially banking. Redlining is what the term was used, and it still is prevalent. Even if it's not called the same thing, it still has the same effect. Because this we're talking about is since the turn of the century that those codes came into place, and they are still on many books in many communities that are surrounding Rochester. So how do we deal with that? It's not the physical technology, it's a mindset.
Yeah, that's kind of the crux of the whole housing issue that's out there today. And I know we're talking about a housing crisis, but, and that's because there's a lot of people that want a different kind of housing than they've got. They may be in a, mom and dad's house. They may be in a homeless situation, but there's a need for housing. And the ability for us to build affordable, we've heard that it costs $400,000 to build something new. I know some of the state programs that build quote unquote affordable housing, you would never be able to do if you were a private developer. But the mindset is the issue. And I think there's words out there that just, send people to the moon, affordable housing, workforce housing, attainable housing. It's getting to the point where, you almost have to talk about housing in the terms of square footage. You have to take it down to, well, we're going to build a 1,500 square foot house. You almost can't say some of the words associated with it anymore. But we do need to combat the perception that all renters are bad. Everybody has a perception that all renters are those people, and those people are going to come out and destroy our property values. And, these are the conversations you do have to be able to have. And I think to combat it, I could be all wrong, but I think you have to combat it with things like economics. You just have to approach it from where people kind of react the most, and it's got to be pretty much factual. I don't think fighting NIMBYs with emotional arguments is ever going to work. But I think you have to do it with economics that, look, we can't afford to keep sprawling. We can't afford to keep building, single-family lots that have 100-foot frontage on them. That's just too much road, that's too much water and sewer line, that's consuming too much real estate. And we have a lot of room in our villages, our towns, in our urban areas where you can do infill housing and meet the demands. We just have to put the regulations in place that allow it. And to put the regulations in place, you got to stop the fighting about the perception of the people that are going to occupy it. So I didn't answer the question. I don't, if I could answer the question, I might not be here, but I would say it's the conversation we've got to have.
I'd like to say something about this, if I may, as well. The inequities we have right now, which are profound and extreme, all have in common that they are the products of history. And we can't understand them or undo them without reckoning with history. We have inherited our history, and we have to look at that inheritance. And that includes looking at inequities. We currently have, and I'm speaking as an individual, I stress here, an administration in Washington that is struggling to rid our vocabulary of reality, including the reality of profound inequities codified in, originally explicitly racially coded, and then later only implicitly racially encoded with the same effects, such that we know today that the average savings of a white family exceed by orders of magnitude the average savings of a black family, and that has to do with the fact that the black family could not buy property affordably. If they did buy it, they bought it for much more than it was worth and paid for much more than it was worth. We have to recognize the inequities, and this means actually studying our history. We have an executive order with the title, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. It is an untrue and insane executive order. Again, I'm speaking as an individual here, and we will not get that right until we can look at it honestly. And if you read that executive order, it cautions us that looking at history from an equity lens causes division and shame. It does exactly the opposite. It gives us our first chance at healing and unity based on reality rather than a denial of facts. And we can make our country great by recognizing the work that we have to do together.
I'd like to bring us back to technology for a moment here. And the reason why I want to do that is to talk about the commonality between communities, right? And technology usually bridges that gap. And even in some of the poverty-stricken areas, someone has a phone or some way to communicate through technology. Can you think about ways of being innovative when you're looking at areas that have like 101 vacant lots, right? One of the things we're doing in our community is bringing technology to our gardens, right? So for me, when I think about technology, I think about innovation. How do we use it to benefit the things that can bring people together, even in some of the most poverty-stricken areas across the country?
So I love this question because we believe very strongly in workforce development in Tech Rochester, and that includes, supporting the underserved communities and giving them digital equity and giving them access, which they don't necessarily have at their fingertips. I'm of the opinion that we just need to give it to people. Like, we just need to give them a fair shake. And not doing that sets, a standard that there's a certain level of communities that we don't care about. So for me, I want to see policymakers invest more energy into access to information, access to technology, giving everybody the level playing field, giving them opportunities that they would otherwise have to go seek out themselves. We are not doing a service to our future workforce by not giving them accessibility, by not bridging that digital divide. And so we're trying to work, particularly with some of the inner city schools, to talk about what are some of these challenges that you're facing with information access, with digital access, and how can Tech Rochester, now granted, we don't, we're not for profit, so we don't exactly have funding to support these efforts, but we will go help find funding and find companies and organizations that will help support these efforts so that we can start bringing access to these underserved communities. That's where I stand on it. I think we just need to give it to people.
So access is something that Monroe County has been thinking about and working on, and so have many other communities in New York State. With the infrastructure law that was passed, there was funding through ARPA dollars for broadband. Monroe County spent about $8 million on trying to improve access in, I believe, 10 or so zip codes within the city of Rochester. And then I can't remember the other zip codes, but they were working in some of the more rural areas. And the challenge of access is different in either of those places for a variety of reasons. And so each of the communities that is using that funding to try to increase access identifies what is the most appropriate way to increase that access. Do they make sure that the lines that need to go into those neighborhoods are there? Do they find ways to use new technologies that would be cheaper than having lines be built in those neighborhoods? And so that's something that, like I know Monroe County has done, Livingston County is working on, Wayne County, and that it's not inexpensive. I know Livingston County is spending about $10,000 per hookup to try to get more people. That is because it's a rural county, and so those distances are greater. We can spend a little bit less and maybe have a little bit more bang for our buck because the people that we are servicing in the city are generally closer together. But access helps you then to figure out what are your next steps, to be able to take on those innovations, to identify ways that you can improve yourself in a way that allows you to move to that next step, whatever it may be, or make those connections with your neighbors that allows you to be a more resilient community as well.
In the back.
Getting back to the technology and transportation issue, it's just like an observation that I've had over the few years of looking at the development of electric cars and autonomous vehicles. The technology of the automobile allowed, and forget about the redlining and all that stuff, there are a lot of the reasons why people think the suffers, but the basic dream of you getting your car, maybe where you want to, was the technology that allows us to do that in the 50s and 60s. It decimated cities in the fact that it ruined density, which ruined public transit. And we saw this kind of shift back, especially in Rochester, where people are moving back into the cities, living in Park Avenue and downtown and all this. And it's kind of come back a little bit. More density, especially in a lot of larger urban cities. You go into Washington and New York City, there's this huge density of population and using mass transit again. Now all of a sudden, you get this technology, electric vehicles, which makes it clean and cheaper, supposedly, to drive farther. Or autonomous vehicles. You could live in 3 hours from where you work, and of course, work at home as well, and no longer have to go into a city because, or if you do, you can take an autonomous vehicle and not have to, you can work in 3 hours in your car while you're getting there. So, will the future of autonomous vehicles and electric cars kind of set back the progress we tried to make in getting people to live in a more dense urban area?
Pretty sure that's to you, Peter.
You've just put your finger on one of the biggest debates on the subject, namely if you make driving effortless and you can do whatever you want while you're in the car, maybe people will travel much more. The cars are sold on the claim that they'll be sustainable because they're electric, but of course these cars are heavy and moving a mass takes energy, and generating that energy takes a power plant. And if we want to increase the share of our grid powered by renewables like solar and wind, then we have to reduce total demand. Otherwise, we'll never keep up, no matter how much we expand wind and solar. So we have a losing proposition there if the effortlessness of riding in a so-called autonomous vehicle makes people do more of it. I have what might paradoxically be some good news on that subject, which is that autonomous cars that you and I will be riding in are nowhere in sight. They're not coming anytime soon. They appear to be coming soon because of the fact that companies that operate robo-taxis are willing to lose a lot of money. They're not going to be willing to lose a lot of money on everybody. They are doing it for a little bit of publicity to attract investment and try to get some traction. But we already know what can happen if you don't have to pay attention to the road. If you summon an Uber driven by a human being right now, the actual cost of that ride, not the price, but the cost of that ride is already less than a autonomous car, and yet it's too expensive for people to take every day. Maybe there are people who take Ubers every day. I don't know them. This is not a practical way to get around. And if it's not true for human-driven Ubers, it's even less true for a robo-taxi, because people think, well, the robo-taxi saves the labor cost. It doesn't even do that. You've got an operations center staffed by well-paid people supervising all these cars. And they have to be supervising all these cars because they make so many dumb mistakes, and they're going to keep making a lot of dumb mistakes. So I don't see a future for these cars. I want to close this comment, though, by saying I do not call them autonomous cars, and for a very good reason. The term is misleading. It's, I think, calculated to make us overestimate what they can do. The best autonomous car in the world has zero autonomy. It is absolutely deterministic. It does only what its human operators and programmers want it to do. If you ever had a truly autonomous car and you summoned it to come to you and say, I want to go to the coffee shop, it could say, no, I don't feel like it. That would be what autonomous is. And engineers will say, oh, we mean autonomous in the engineering sense. No, they don't. I've studied where this word came from. It's an abused term, and it gives us the image of a super rational robotic entity that has no emotions and will do everything rationally and optimally. It won't. If you want a successful so-called autonomous car, it's got to exceed the speed limit, or as Susan mentioned, it's not, I like to control my speed. And you're going to be frustrated if it's always going 30 and a 30, right? If it's never, giving people clearance by touching the yellow line. So the robotic cars are programmed with an emotional bias, that is the bias in favor of the vehicle occupant, because they're the ones paying the fare, and that comes at the expense of people outside the vehicle who the car will be taking chances with. So maybe this is a long way of saying, don't worry about it.
One more?
It seems that the solutions to urban mobility, we already have them, right? We know that it's dense walkable development. We know that it's funding public transportation. But in terms of the future, there's a lot of money in this autonomous vehicle hype, right? And there's a lot of money just kind of coming down the pipeline. And it's worrisome that people are kind of just adopting it or just opening their arms to all of this technology, saying it will solve all of our issues. And I was wondering, given your research into the history, if there's any particularly compelling examples on how people were able to oppose this technology. I'll be honest, I haven't fully read your book yet, so once I do that, I'm sure the answer is partially in there, but if we could address that.
It's a fantastic question. If you go to the National Museum of American History in Washington, which is near my home, you don't pay anything because it's taxpayer supported. You go to the biggest exhibit they have there, it's called America on the Move, and it's in the General Motors Hall of Transportation. They spent $10 million for that name. And if you go there, you'll find out that actually Americans have always just wanted the car. And even when it's a little crazy, and they, to their credit, they admit it's a little excessive. They'll say, well, you know what? It's a free country and love is blind, and you don't need pointy-headed experts at universities judging you for liking to drive. Now, if you actually look at the history, though, as I've done, and I don't mean the published books or the documentaries or the exhibits, I mean the historical records, what you'll find is that people were fighting like nuts all over the country, including in Rochester. I did a little work before coming here to make sure I knew had this right, where people were blocking the streets, not because they hated cars, but because they wanted walkable streets. Not because they wanted drivers never to drive, but because they wanted them to go slowly where kids were. These were usually, but not always, mothers. These protests were illegal. They happened in basically every city. At least every city I look into, I inevitably find in their records a case where like 24 mothers blocked the streets, sat in lawn chairs and said, nobody's driving through here till we get drivers to slow down. And that went right through the peak of the automobile era. The 1950s was the peak of this. In other words, what I'm trying to say is we have a history of popular mass opposition to car domination. Don't let people talk you into thinking that opposing car domination means you hate all drivers. It's actually quite the opposite. You'd like drivers to have choices besides driving. That's a good news message for everybody. So I think our history can be liberating. It can be empowering. The civil rights movement was empowered by the history of the struggle before the civil rights movement. The Votes for Women movement, I know, and I'm sensitive to the fact that we're in Rochester, which was a heart of this movement. It drew upon history in its cause. Well, we have history on our side here, but we need to uncover it and tell these inspiring stories, and we have a lot of them that are untold today.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Thank you, this went fast. I want to thank all of our speakers, Patrick Gooch, Susan Kavanaugh, and Peter Norton.